Welcome to our study of Rinzin Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities with commentary by Kyabje Kangyur Rinpoche, also known as Longchen Yeshe Dorje, who was a very great master who in many ways has been instrumental in some of the important really auspicious conditions for the establishment of Buddhism in the Western world. Even though Kangyur Rinpoche never traveled to the West, he had Western students. Some of you might have seen this documentary called Return to Gandhi Road, which recounts really the situation in which Westerners met this great teacher. Particularly, it recounts the encounter of a young musician from New Zealand and his encounter. But it also documents the life of Kangyur Rinpoche and his meeting with some of his Western students. But Kangyur Rinpoche was a very, very great master, and we hear about his life here and there. His family is very modest, so they don't speak about him a lot, but from what we gather, an extraordinary great master, and someone who was very close with really the greatest masters of this present day and age, namely Kyabje Dingun Chenzo Rinpoche, Dujom Rinpoche, and other great masters. So his commentary is regarded as extremely profound. And also Dilgu Khenzo Rinpoche actually was somewhat involved in this. Kangyur Rinpoche's son, Jigme Khenzo Rinpoche, once mentioned that Dingun Chenzo Rinpoche completed some of the sections that hadn't been completed by Kangyur Rinpoche. So this is a very profound commentary that we then have. So we should regard this as something very profound, important, and so forth. And as we're studying this, then we would want to generate this awakened attitude that this is something we intend to apply ultimately for the benefit of all sentient beings. So we'll begin with the supplication to the author of our root text, Rinzin Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind thermas, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So we're presently looking at refuge, and we're looking at the reasons why to take refuge. And primarily, we talk about taking refuge in the three jewels: the Buddha, the Awakened One, the Dharma, his instructions to others on the path to awakening, and Sangha, those who traveled the path. So presently, we're looking at the Dharma, and that's where we're defining really the Dharma in terms of two ways to understand the Dharma. Of course, there are many different ways that Dharma is explained, but here we're talking about two aspects of it. One is the cessation and the path, and with that we mean the nature of reality when it's no longer being misconceived, misperceived, and the path, the way in which we attain this insight. So Jigme Lingpa writes in the root text, Dharma is nirvana, path, and virtue. These are what it teaches. It is both fruit and all the acts whereby the fruit is gained. It therefore has two natures called two truths, cessation and the path. In terms of exposition and of that which is expounded, there is Dharma of transmission and of realization. So we have the two natures, the nature of things as they are, the cessation of confusion, and the path, the way in which we achieve that. And in terms of then how the Dharma comes down to us, how it has been taught and handed down, we talk about two Dharmas, that of you could say the theory, the teachings from the Buddha, and the realization, the living lineage of awakened individuals. So that's the two. So the first of that then is defined in terms of 12 branches, and 3 collections, as well as a 4th collection also. So we say, Jigme Lingpa writes, the sacred writings in 12 branches are the Dharma of transmission, which, arranged as antidotes, become the 3 collections and also the collection of Vijayadharas endowed with greater means. And since the scriptures all consist of syllables, the latter are the basis of our pledges. So that's where, even though the Dharma lies beyond words, we rely on the words and we commit to the meaning as it's taught through these words, these syllables. And then presently we're looking at this verse 9, which says, the Dharma then of realization holds within it step by step the qualities contained in the 5 paths, beginning with the 4 close mindfulnesses. It is the primal wisdom of elimination and realization, possessed by noble beings. It is the Buddha nature. It is the generation and perfection stages, the dharanis and unbounded ayatanas, all the contents of the 4 paths of learning and the path of no more learning. This Dharma, therefore, is the primal wisdom present in the minds of those abiding on the 10 grounds of the causal vehicle and all the boundless grades of realization of the Vajrayana, the 13 levels of fruition and the rest. So last time we looked a bit at the nature of these 4 paths, and now we're going to look at these, what we call the 10 grounds of the causal vehicle. And this is something we come across a lot. We refer to it as the 10 bhumis, the 10 grounds, the 10 bodhisattva levels, and so forth. And it is ways in which the bodhisattva gradually sheds confusion, gradually sheds ego, gradually sheds cognitive obscurations, and gradually arrives at the level of awakening. So we talk about that in terms of these 10 bhumis. People who have studied the Madhyamika Avatara would have come across Chandrakirti's presentation of the middle way in terms of explaining the entire 10 bhumis, how it relates to the paramitas, the 10 paramitas, or the 10 practices that take us beyond confusion. So everywhere we go in the Mahayana, there's a lot of references to this. So that's where we now we'll look at the text. And also, yes, the boundless grades of realization of the Vajrayana, the 13 levels and so forth, are ways in which we then speak about the qualities of awakening. But basically, we talk about essentially the whole Mahayana in terms of 10 grounds, and then a bit more in detail around the qualities of awakening in terms of sometimes 13 and sometimes more. But we'll look at that in the text. So the commentary reads, in the expository vehicle of causality, the basis of such qualities is the 10 grounds. So we're presently talking about the Dharma, right? So there's the Dharma of transmission and how it's understood in terms of the path. And then we're presently looking in terms of stages of realization, gradually eliminating obscurations and confusion and gradually attaining realization. So the first is Raptu, or is perfect joy, in Tibetan Raptugawa. This is the basis of the qualities of extraordinary primordial wisdom of the Mahayana path of seeing. In Asanga Sutra Alankara, it is described thus: seeing that one is approaching enlightenment and that beings can be benefited. The Bodhisattva feels intense joy, and this is the reason why this ground is so called. So this we often see referred to as really the opening to the realization of the Bodhisattva, the seeing of egolessness. So actually the Asanga's Sutra Alankara is one of the 5 treasures of Maitreya, and it has been recently translated by actually it was translated some years ago by Robert Thurman, but also recently Padmakara has published a translation. I forget exactly what it's referred to. Mahayana Sutramkala, the ornament of the supreme vehicle or something like that. But anyway, so it's a rather large work, but it now exists in English. And it's a lot of the Mahayana teachings are really referred to this particular scripture, the Mahayana Sutra Lamkara. Anyway, so in there, we will see a lot of the definitions of how we understand the 10 bhumis, or the 10 grounds, are sort of the definitions come from this scripture. So the first was perfect joy. The second now is immaculate, tima meba. This is the foundation for the qualities associated with the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the lesser level of the lesser Mahayana path of meditation. It is described in the Sutra Lamkara thus: since at this level there is no need of effort to preserve a spotless discipline, it is called immaculate. In the Madhyamika it's described with a curious image. It is described just as the ocean will not hold a corpse. And there's this general notion in the Indian cosmology that when you see, what is it you call it, a beach washer or something, you know, when a corpse is found on the beach, that's the ocean that's expelling these corpses, because the ocean is perceived as pure. It's the domain of the Nagas. It's the domain of purity. And in general, there's always this notion of water as being very pure. You always have to be careful around water in this sort of within the Asian cosmology, and you could say how to handle life. One of the things you do is you never pollute water. There's always a lot of respect around water because it's the domain of the Nagas, and hence also impurities are expelled from the ocean. And so that's why the Bodhisattva and poor discipline just don't go together. They're two different things. They don't work. So effortlessly, spontaneously at this level, then there is this, you could say, complete absence of poor discipline. So it's called the immaculate. So that constitutes so we're looking at the path of meditation. We would say when someone attains the first bhumi, they actually arrive at what we call the path of seeing. And this is where then the realization is deepened through the path then that follows, namely the path of meditation. So that's where we now talk about the path of meditation in terms of the lesser aspect. The third bhumi, luminous, Virchepa. This forms the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the middle level of the lesser Mahayana path of meditation. It is described in the Sutra Alamkara thus: since the bright light of the understanding of reality is shining forth, this ground is called luminous. Third bhumi. Fourth bhumi, radiant, Chowachen. This is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom associated with the superior level of the lesser Mahayana path of meditation. So you can see, essentially, the path of meditation is going to run through the first 9 bhumis, or actually from the second onward, so all the way to enlightenment. So this is where we're talking about the lesser, and within the lesser you have the lesser of the lesser, the medium of the lesser, and the superior of the lesser. Anyway, it's said in the Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: since the Bodhisattva possesses qualities conducive to enlightenment that burn away the twofold veil, this ground is called radiant. The twofold veil being cognitive obscuration and emotional obscuration. Hard to uphold, Jankawa. This is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the lesser level of the middle Mahayana path of meditation. In the Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: since bringing beings to complete maturity and taking care of one's own mind is difficult to achieve, even for a wise bodhisattva, this ground is called hard to uphold. Now, just a word on how we actually see this. I remember when I was a young Buddhist back in the days of happy hippie Dharma in Denmark, there was one Lama that was, Kangyur Rinpoche left the Lama with the Danish Sangha, very kind. And this poor Lama, he lasted for quite some time there, and then he moved on. But before he arrived, I remember there was a fair bit of speculation about which bhumi he was on. And we were sort of speculating that he's probably on the higher bhumis, but maybe we were sort of maybe fifth or sixth or whatever. And so this very kind Lama, Sikkimese Lama, he came to Copenhagen and he did a wonderful job in terms of providing the sort of foundations for a bit of teaching and practice and so on. But I think we in general would say that to be even at the first bhumi is rather extraordinary. So we're talking about very sublime beings, even from the first onward. So it's not as if, you know, any old person who's done a 3-year retreat comes out on, is already on the bhumis. That's not exactly the case. We are talking about some extraordinary degrees of spiritual qualities. We would say already at the first level, the Bodhisattva is able to manifest 100 emanations. So we regard the various masters as, you could say, in terms of the sutra teachings, we would say to be at these various bhumis is something that is quite extraordinary. Sometimes in the classifications that we use in the context of Vajrayana, a little bit different. But anyway, just sticking to the sutra teachings, these spiritual levels are extraordinary. And we would sometimes talk about great beings like Nagarjuna being on the bhumis. You know, there's various ways Nagarjuna is represented, but this is the scope of very great beings. Clearly manifest. And if you remember, if you studied the Madhyamaka Avatara, this is where then Chandrakirti begins to expound the paramita of prajna. And that's also where the teachings on emptiness, the teachings on emptiness of person, the emptiness of phenomena, and so on, is expounded at about 200 verses. That sort of constitutes the bulk of the introduction to the middle way. So that's this particular bhumi that is explained there. And Kangyur Rinpoche writes, this is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the middle level of the middle Mahayana path of meditation. In the Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: since on this level, for the Bodhisattva who relies on the paramita of wisdom, the nature of samsara and nirvana is openly evident. This ground is called clearly manifest. Far progressed, Jingdu Songwa. This is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the superior level of the middle Mahayana path of meditation. In Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: since this ground feeds into the one great way, the eighth ground or first pure level, it is called far progressed. So then the eighth bhumi, and that's the first of what we call the eight pure bhumis, and it's at the eighth bhumi then that the ordinary projections and confused ways that we perceive the world fall away. And it's at the eighth bhumi then that we talk about that organically or naturally there is this experience of pure perception, that the skandhas are no longer seen in terms of ordinary self, the experience of the phenomenal world in terms of the 5 elements and so forth are no longer seen in terms of ordinary solid objects, but seen in terms of their pure qualities. So this is then also the foundation for the pure perception that is essentially taking the scope of the bodhisattva of the higher levels and making that the path. Essentially you could say, an authentic way of perceiving the world. So that's the 8th and 9th and 10th bhumi that are regarded as the pure levels. So it says here, immovable, mioa. This is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the lesser level of the superior Mahayana path of meditation. In the Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: since the Bodhisattva cannot be shaken by the 2 types of perception, this ground is called immovable. Let's check out what they mean with that. This is where I run into this little bug. Come on. C note 266. I think we're just going to the two types, so it cannot be shaken by the. Okay, yeah, I have to confess, I'm not. I should have, of course, checked that out prior. I might just rely on the opening this in a different app. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Okay. I wish I could get this thing. Okay, I'll just try. Because it's interesting. This is quite significant in terms of understanding what happens on the boomies. So let's just make sure we get it. All right. Yeah, there's some substantial information there. According to the Abhidharma, and that's also where it's explained in Mipa Rinpoche's Kenjuk, the gateway to knowledge. Perception is defined as that which grasps or identifies characteristics. Okay, now this is in fact everything that happens to us in terms of our interaction and our experience. We are continually experiencing perceptions. You right now hearing, seeing, but what we know from physics and also within the Mahayana analysis, that in fact when we analyze, we can see that these are just constructions of objects that are constructed according to our particular individual disposition. If you look at neuroscience, they'll talk about how the brain generates images. If you look at the Buddhists, we'll say it's the all crown that generates images. But both agree that there is in fact nothing out there that really, you could say, exists the way that we think it does, as some solid external objects. Now, this is significant. So what we have when we talk about perception is our mind that subjectively labels and grasps, fixates on a particular appearance, and we then attribute characteristics, we label it in a particular way. And this is where we're actually obscured. We're not really seeing, but rather we are projecting. So that's where we project according to our particular disposition, our particular karma. So this is quite significant. And it's this which, according in the Mahayana path, or in the path of enlightenment in general, then gradually this fixation on what really is just the perceptions, karmic perceptions, is lessened. So that's where there's more and more an appreciation of emptiness, and there's more and more an understanding of simply just all of this arising as display within absolute reality. So that's where, as we're practicing this, we talk about there's less and less entanglement with these two aspects of perception. So the first is, it's called that which grasps or identifies characteristics, senpa simba. Perception is related to the six senses, right? The five physical senses, which are non-conceptual, which is hear, see, and so forth, and the mind, the mental sense, which functions by means of concepts. That's where we think. Oh yeah, that's a table, that's a chair. I like this, I don't like that, all of that. But that's entirely generated by the sixth sense, which in the Buddhist context means simply just the thinking mind. These two categories of conceptual and non-conceptual perceptions are themselves divided into two categories to whether in the course of their activity they succeed in discerning the characteristics of their objects. If they do so, they are referred to as senche, discerning, and if they fail to do so, they're called senme, non-discerning. So one is where we have concepts, the other is non-conceptual. The 5 non-conceptual sense perceptions, that's just the 5 senses, seeing, hearing, and so forth, are regarded as discerning, senche, when they are operating normally and perceiving their proper objects, colors, sounds, smells, and so forth. So that's where we simply give them particular labels. Mental perception, which we have said functions by means of concepts, is said to be discerning when it distinguishes identities or names. So again, this is where there is some conceptuality happening. This happens when, 1, the mind recognizes an object and correlates it with a name, right? We see, we give it the label. The table doesn't think I am a table, neither does the chair, right? And all objects are like that. So that's where we provide this sort of label, which is referred to as discerning. And also the mind. When the mind knows what is referred to and a name, when a name is given. So that's according to Tsenche, when there's this, you could say, conceptual labeling. Perception is non-discerning, Tsenme, when the sense organ in question is fully functional, but there is no object. This is where, again, there's a freedom from this conceptual labeling. This occurs in states of profound absorption, whether of the Aryas, sublime beings with less obscurations, or beings in the state known as the peak of existence. So this again, these are states in which there's not ordinary perception happening. So these are just states of absorption. They can happen in beings that are less obscured, but it can also happen for those that essentially abide in the realm of the gods. It occurs also when the mind is unable to identify and name objects, as in situations when something is encountered but is not recognized because the mind has no prior knowledge of it. This is the common experience of children who are gradually building up a knowledge of their environment. Conversely, mental perception is also non-discerning when, again, through lack of experience, it does not know what is referred to when names are given, as, for example, when an unknown language is heard. There you are in a foreign country and they're talking about all sorts of things that are making sense to them, but we have no idea what's happening. It should be noted that non-discerning perception does not refer to the mere privation of sensory stimulus, as, for example, when one is in a dark place with one's eyes open or in a soundproof room. In this case, the senses do in fact have objects, darkness and silence, respectively. So in fact, that also applies to what we call sensory deprivation, because we are seeing dark. We're also, even though we are not hearing sounds as such, we're still cognizant of the fact that there's silence. Okay. Let's see if I can get back from here. Thank you for your patience. Let's jump. Yes. Okay. Okay. Not. Okay, hold on. I'm just gonna have to search. Hey, bingo. Okay. There we are. Okay, so this is at the level of the immovable. And again, since the Bodhisattva cannot be shaken by the 2 types of perception. So the 2 types were those that are discerning and non-discerning. So these essentially are not held, confused by, or entangled with the ordinary perceptions. Perfect intellect, Lekpe Lodra. This is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the middle level of the superior Mahayana path of meditation. In the Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: the ground where the Bodhisattva gains 4 perfect knowledges. And hence it is called the 4. These are the same as described in Appendix 5, the 4 perfect knowledges, Soso Yangdakpa Rikpa Shi. I'm going to pass on that. 10, Cloudodharma, Chikichin. This is the basis of the qualities of the extraordinary primordial wisdom of the superior level of the Mahayana path of meditation. In the Sutra Alamkara, it is described thus: since the expanse of the Bodhisattva's mind is filled with every kind of concentration and dharani meaning the sort of the great capacities of the mind in terms of understanding and retention, remembrance, as though with 2 clouds, concentration and dharani. The ground is called cloud of Dharma. So that's the 10th bhumi. According to the resultant secret mantra, there are 13 grounds. In other words, and that's where it simply just says these are qualities of the, let's just see what it says then. That's right. This enumeration is according to Mahayoga Tantra. So when you come across the Mahayoga, they will talk about that. If you go in the context of Dzogchen, particularly the inner Dzogchen, then we talk about 16 grounds. But essentially, it really just refers to qualities as they're understood of the of awakening. In other words, above the 10 sutra grounds, we find the 11th ground of universal light, which is the Nirmanakaya level, the 12th ground of lotus free of all desire, which is the Sambhogakaya level, and the 13th ground of Vajra holder, otherwise known as the great wheel of collection of syllables. Which is the Dharmakaya level. There are, however, different methods of classification. Indeed, there are different systems of Vajrayana ground as set forth in various tantras, and these are innumerable. Let's see here what they say. This is from Khenpo Yönga, and he says, the various systems of the enumerations of the grounds of the resultant vehicle are simply ways of labeling the different aspects of the 3 kayas or the qualities of the Buddha. They do not imply progression, as in the case of the expository vehicle of causality, i.e. the Bodhisattva grounds on the path of seeing and meditation. So these are just really, you could say, like it said here, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya, ways of labeling the qualities of awakening. Kangyur Rinpoche says, for example, in the Do Gompa Dupa, the gathering of wisdom intent, and Anuyoga Tantra, the names given are the keen, the distinguished, the encouraged, the confident, and the greatly powerful. Again, same thing, different qualities of awakening. The sacred Dharma, then, is the extraordinary wisdom of the elimination and realization that suffuses the minds of those abiding on the grounds and paths. So here then we conclude the discussion around the Dharma. We're talking about the Dharma in terms of transmission and the Dharma in terms of realization. So Khenpo Yönga, he says, indeed, that which is commonly referred to as Dharma is not some truly existent entity. It is merely the qualities of realization in the minds of individuals on the path of learning and no more learning. So when we talk about Dharma in terms of realization, it's not something. It's just the absence of confusion, its absence of obscuration, in which, yes, qualities manifest. And from the external point of view, somebody who has less and less obscurations seem to be transformed, seem to go through some blossoming. And we talk about illumination and realization, but this really just signifies that there's less and less obscuration, just like we would say the moon, when it goes through the various phases, the moon itself doesn't change. There's not anything that actually is changed or something that is added. So then there's the qualities of the Sangha. Let's just see, there's some questions. When it is said that the first Bhumi Bodhisattva can manifest 100 emanations, what does that mean exactly? Good question. I would like to make it perfectly clear. This is where I have to say this goes beyond my scope. Even logically, rationally, I cannot understand this. But it is something that's a theme that runs through Buddhism. As we see, for example, we talk about the various incarnations of lamas. You have the, for example, Jamyen Khyentse Wangpo, numerous incarnations, right? Or according to body, speech, mind, quality, and activity. Yet, what does that actually mean? And that's where there's a few places where I'm very clear. There's things I really don't understand, and this is one of them. Does it mean they are simultaneously controlling 100 different bodies of differing beings? Does it mean in different realms? Are they examples of how exactly that has been put into practice? Look, the best I can do is to give you the classical image, which is the moon, meaning what we call the ground of emanation. Let's say it's Jamyen Khyentse Wangpo or the Buddha or great bodhisattvas, right, on the first Bhumi. Yeah, they then are like the moon. And if you have a container, if you have various containers, they all reflect the moon. So you could very well say the moon is then reflected in 100 different containers. So we would sometimes talk about blessed incarnations. This is where we could talk about somebody who reflects the wisdom, let's say of Jamyen Khyentse Wangpo. So I'm not sure that you're actually thinking of Jamyen Khyentse Wangpo being in 100 places at once, which, of course, the mind of awakened beings is beyond the scope of us. So we could leave it at that. But we could also say that the quality of Jamyen Khyentse Wangpo, according to the merit of beings and so forth, will manifest in numerous ways. And according to the great compassion of the Bodhisattva, is maybe able to reflect in 100 different places. But this is where I would suggest you to ask this, and you could even ask it to a Khenpo. Even though a Khenpo or a Geshe might not be, perfectly awakened, then at least they would be able to give you the classical explanation, which is more or less along the lines of what I've just said here. But you could see maybe they could provide more substantial and satisfying reply to this question. So we've completed the qualities of the Buddha and the Dharma, and then the qualities of the Sangha. So verse 10, it then reads, the Sangha is, in essence, those who are wise and free. They are the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, according as they enter and abide, 4 pairs, 8 kinds in all. When these are all the Bodhisattvas, Buddha's heirs who dwell with these are all the Bodhisattvas, Buddha's heirs who dwell with qualities ineffable upon the grounds of realization. So Sangha, we talk about 2 kinds, the Sangha of the Shravakas and the Sangha of the Bodhisattvas. And that's where we talk about the Arhats, and they belong to the Sangha of the Shravakas, great beings. And we shall see what you could say the difference between the Sangha of the Shravakas and the Sangha of the Bodhisattvas are. But we would say that when it comes to the Shravakas, we talk about them, they're essentially defined in terms of what we call Jigdra Niden, which is then wisdom or insight and freedom. And that's where Tongsa Kangyur Rinpoche will always emphasize, we shouldn't think that Shravakas are sort of amateurs. If we met an Arhat or a Shravaka, we would be immensely impressed. So, but they are nevertheless, they compared to the Bodhisattvas, there's still what we would call some cognitive obscuration and also some obscuration in terms of their aspirations. So that's where we would refer to these as Hinayana, because they are they aspire to a lesser enlightenment. They aspire to a personal freedom and are not willing to relinquish the notion of a personal agenda of enlightenment. Again, difficult. We should be careful not to begin to say, oh, that tradition out there, and talk about other traditions beside maybe our familiar Tibetan tradition, and say, oh, that tradition over there, they're Shravakas, they're Pratyeka Buddhists. They probably wouldn't appreciate that. So we should simply just see these as, you could say, Mahayana ways of defining the path. It doesn't always work. We're not always that politically correct, but I think that might be a skillful way of going about it. So that's the Shravaka, and then we have the Bodhisattvas, who have less cognitive obscurations and who then have, you could say, a greater scope. So we look at the commentary here. Generally speaking, Kangyur Rinpoche then writes, the jewel of the Sangha is the spiritual community of those who are endowed with realization. That is, those who possess a measure of wisdom together with freedom from some of the stains of the two kinds of obscurations. So these two qualities, being wise and being free, these constitute really the qualities of the Sangha. Let's see what note 95 says. The noble Shravakas rid themselves of the erroneous idea that the aggregates and other phenomena are permanent and discrete entities. They understand that they are momentary and mere gatherings of elements, ridding themselves of the personal self, which is nothing more than a merely conceived object. They free themselves of the obscurations of the emotions. In addition to this, the Pratyeka Buddhas realize the emptiness of the percept, but not that of the perceiving consciousness. So that means that at the initial level, the Shravakas, they're free from the personal self and the obscuration of the emotions associated with that. So this is already an enormous degree of spirituality. The Pratyeka Buddhas go even further, because not only are they free from the obscuration that comes from the emotions in terms of self and perception, but they also understand the emptiness of the perceiver. But they don't understand the emptiness, they understand the emptiness of the object, the percept, what is perceived, the perceptions that we have. They understand that to be empty. But they don't understand that consciousness is ultimately empty. So that's where they realize that there's the aggregates and so forth. They are dependent arisen phenomena, but they still attribute solidity to that. Now, this is also interesting in the modern world, because that is also reflected in some traditions in which there still is, and you could say, a rather sort of secular approach in which there's reluctance to embrace the sort of wider vision that we speak about in the general Mahayana teachings. But nevertheless, we also understand Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas as being you could say, the organic foundation for the practice of the path. Now, this is different from the Bodhisattvas, because the Bodhisattvas don't have any kind of reference point. They fully understand this emptiness. They understand that dependent arising inevitably means that something is without any reference point, with any absolute reality, true inherent existence. So Khenpo Yunga then writes, noble bodhisattvas understand that all phenomena included within samsara and nirvana are like space, primordially beyond all conceptual constructions. They know that not even the names of these two conceived objects, namely the two types of self, person, and phenomena, exist. So that's why they perfectly understand what we refer to as emptiness. This is exactly the scope of the teaching of the Madhyamika Avatara, the introduction to the Middle Way, namely that there's an understanding that the two types of self, person, and phenomena, not even the names of these conceptions have any reality. In this way, they have an unhindered capacity for dispelling the two types of obscuration. And that's where when this constitutes the view, there might not be the realization, but if there is the view that understands logically and is determined, has established with certainty the insight of the absence of, or rather the emptiness of self, of person, and the emptiness of phenomena, then the view is established, and that then gives a very powerful ground for dispelling the two types of obscurations, emotional and cognitive obscurations. So then, in terms of the Hinayana and Mahayana Sangha. So now we talk about these, and we understand Hinayana and Mahayana in terms of something that exists when we speak about the gradual path. It's a doxographic, or you could say a classification of gradual stages on the path. And again, we don't want to point at any particular traditions, but at the same time also realize this is you could say, place where we need to distinguish between the initial limited understanding that is basic to persons that engage in the path initially, and of course, then when there's a wider understanding. So that's where we talk about lesser and greater vehicles, Hinayana and Mahayana. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, if we group the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas together, and if we take into account the two stages of candidate for and abiding by the result, basically entering and fully having realized, right? Associated with any given level, we can distinguish 4 pairs of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. We thus arrive at a total of 8 kinds of realization, or 8 kinds of beings. The 4 kinds of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas are therefore as follows. Let's just see what the footnote tells us. Yeah, I think we'll just leave it at that. Anyway, it'll be quite obvious in the text here. So when we talk about the general stages on the path before we become arhats, we talk about stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and arhat. And that's where for these 4, and this we come across quite often, you'll see this. You'll see these references quite often. You'll say some sublime beings. For example, when Shariputra first time heard this, Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava and so forth, the Buddha has taught that what is it again? The awakened one has taught that all phenomena, dualistic phenomena, arise from causes and so forth. When he heard that, then Shariputra immediately just understood. He entered the level of the stream enterer. So this is where you could say, the very first level of realization of the Hinayana. And then there's the once returner. Again, these are levels of realization. Then we talk about non-returner and arhat. So these we come across a fair bit. So stream enterer, Gyundushu, then it says, the Shravakas who abide in the understanding of the 15 instants of the path of seeing, as described in the Hinayana Abhidharma, and the Shravakas who abide by the path of joining, and the 15 instants of the path of seeing, as described in the Mahayana Abhidharma, are all candidates for the degree of stream enterer. When they reach the 16th instance on the path of seeing, they become stream enterers who abide by the result. They are called stream enterers because they enter the stream of the path whereby they will attain the result. So these are just classifications, and presently I don't I'm not familiar with some of the classifications here, but I would say roughly we can just talk about stream enterer as having these two moments that are defined in terms of the first 15, that is the, what is it again, candidate for, and then the 16th, which is abiding by the result. Basically, entering into and then realizing. Let's see what they say here. So beings that achieve this, they will be reborn no more than 7 times in the desire realm. So that's where they then, after seven lifetimes, they then engage into the experience of cessation of an arhat. Okay, once returner, Lenshik Chiron, says the stream enterers who have rid themselves of the 5 degrees of obscurations in the desire realm eliminated by meditation are candidates for the state of once returner. On relinquishing the 6th degree, they become once returners abiding by the result. They are so called because they return once more to the desire realm. Okay? Stream enterer, Gyundushu. The Shravakas who abide in the understanding of the 15 instants of the path of seeing as described in the Hinayana Abhidhamma, and the Shravakas who abide by the path of joining and the 15 instants of the path of seeing as described in the Mahayana Abhidhamma are all candidates for the degree of stream enterer. When they reach the 16 instants of the path of seeing, they become stream enterers who abide by the result. They are called stream enterers because they enter the stream of the path whereby they will attain the result. Okay. Okay. Isn't that what we had before? Sorry, I'm reading what we just did. Sorry. Did I just? Yeah, good grief. I went. All right. Non-returner. Chirmionwa. The once returners who have rid themselves of obscurations in the desire realm, eliminated by meditation to the 7th and 8th degree, but who have not yet eliminated those of the 9th, are candidates for the state of non-returner. When they discard all such obscurations, they become non-returners, abiding by the result. They are so called because they will not be reborn in the desire realm. Okay, once returners, they will only have one sort of, sorry, they will not fall back into this desire realm, right? Arhat, Drachomba. The non-returners who are free of all the obscurations of the higher realms, i.e. the form and formless, eliminated by meditation right up to the 8th degree of the peak of existence, are candidates for arhatship. When they discard all the remaining obscurations of the 3 worlds, they become arhats abiding by the result. Arhat means foe destroyer. They are so called because they have destroyed their enemy afflictive emotions. Okay, so this is where then the path of the Hinayana, it is sort of arrives at its culmination, which is beyond the 3 worlds. It's beyond samsara, and yet it is really just abiding in a state which is the cessation of samsara, and it's not full awakening. But nevertheless, at that level, there is no suffering as such. So there is what we could call a small nirvana, the cessation, and that's because they've destroyed the enemy afflictions and emotions. So the Hinayana path has its own system of 8 grounds. Let's see here. On the Hinayana path of joining, the practitioner definitively acquires the character of Shravaka. This ground is therefore called the ground of the Shravaka character, Rikisa. Okay. Those belonging to the Sangha of the Mahayana are called the children of the conqueror. They dwell on the bhumis or grounds of realization produced by the practices of the expository vehicle of causality. Their qualities are inexpressible, and that's where we went through these 10 grounds that they gradually experience. Now, these are called the outer Sangha. The inner Sangha comprises the kinis, dakas, and wisdom protectors. So this is more specifically in terms of the Vajrayana, in which then we talk about the Vajrayana Sangha as dakas and dakinis and the Dhammapalas. That's a discussion we will have at a later stage, I think. Okay, I think we'll stop here then. And if you have any questions, please go ahead. So as you can see, some of these classifications are not something that I've studied in depth. I'm sort of familiar with them, and it's sort of what we hear along the way. And if I were a Khenpo or a Geshe, of course, I would be completely familiar with all of these and would probably be able to make quotations and references and like that. However, just as a layperson who has a rather superficial grasp of the Dharma, this is something I've heard. And I have occasionally looked in this work called The Gateway to Knowledge, which is a rather dense scripture, which essentially summarizes impressively the Tripitaka, the entire Buddha Vajrayana, and all the specific teachings that you have in there, particularly the teachings of, say, the Prajnaparamita and the Abhidharma, with a very condensed summary of all the information you have there, but it's rather dense. And of course, if you know that, then you also study the sutras and the Tripitaka, then you have, you could say, a fantastic framework for understanding all the various teachings of the Buddha. But this is where you would, this is being exactly as it says, that is becoming learned, that is becoming, someone with great knowledge, which I definitely would never pretend to have. Would you speak to the importance of understanding such classifications and how helpful it is? Well, it is helpful if you really want to have a thorough understanding. And I mean, we are actually fortunate that we have in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, we have a culture of actually grasping an enormous amount of information. And it is, that's also why, for example, you would say people who study literature, they've studied an enormous amount of authors. They have a vast knowledge of sort of the various categories within their field. And that's why they're professors, lecturers, and so on. So that's where, luckily for us, we actually have a tradition of exposition that has an enormous grasp of the words of the Buddhas. But it's also very commonly agreed upon that it's not necessary for the practitioner to have that great grasp. And so when we as practitioners, primarily lay people, come across this, we can just sort of go a little bit like the Tibetans, they say, chapsuchi. It means I take refuge, meaning this is wonderful, I rejoice in it, but I'm also just going to take these vast teachings, I put them on my shrine, I take refuge in them, and I just rejoice that they're there. And that actually becomes, you could say, a foundation for trust. It's just like if we go to the National Library, we'll go, wow, there's a lot of knowledge accumulated here. And if you come across knowledgeable people, experts, and so on, you sometimes go, wow, that's really great. And you trust them. So you can say on the basis of reading something like this, it's not really necessary that we are that we know all of this, but it's sort of reassuring that all this insight, this science is there. Just like it's reassuring that there's a lot of great science within medicine and within technology that's there, and you just gotta go, good, it's great, it's there. That's reassuring. And I'm very happy that somebody has actually gone to the length of learning all of that, and it gives you confidence in the authenticity of the teaching. I'm curious that would Theravada agree to this classification, or is it only from Mahayana side? The Theravadan tradition operates with slightly different ways of classifications. So we should never make the mistake of calling the Theravadins Hinayana. I don't think they would appreciate that, even though probably there would be some overlaps, but we should probably play it safe. Like I was saying, the political correct way is really just of understanding the term Hinayana as referring to some stages on the path in ways that we understand the Mahayana path. So essentially Hinayana is a Mahayana expression. So that's where we probably would need to study the Mahayana on the terms of the Mahayana and the Theravadan according to the Theravadan tradition. In the Theravadan, you have various ways of classifications, various traditions of commentary, and so forth. Thanks, Jakob. That's a relief. This is wonderful. No idea what it means. I rejoice. Same like, you know, when if I talk with my mechanic or my doctor, they begin to explain. There's a place where I just sort of go, wow, isn't it just wonderful that they know this? and I'm perfectly comfortable to not getting all the detail, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for today. So to be continued. Right. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.